Hello and welcome. I promised you all that I would give you some insight into how to complete the policy analysis paper, and hopefully some of these insights will make your paper better. How I would characterize this is that by the end of the semester, a lot of times we forget what we were doing in the beginning. However, we spent a good deal of time at the very beginning spelling out what a policy analysis paper ought to look like. The policy analysis, assignment, and directions. In fact, there's a tab you can click on there, and it will give you an opportunity to look at several important concepts. First of all, you'll see the actual directions, you'll see the rubric, you'll see the checklist, and you'll see a note on source quality. I would recommend that you read through all of these. Probably the most important thing for you to read through is the actual directions for the paper. If you look at the directions for the paper, they actually tell you what your final paper ought to look like. And so I think that maybe I should go over that in a little more detail to help you out. All right, now first of all, the paper is supposed to be 10 to 12 pages long. Now, I know full well that if you were doing a policy analysis for a professional organization or a government agency or an advocacy group, that you would write a much longer than 10 to 12 page paper. In fact, your detailing of the alternatives that you want the policy decision makers to actually look at would probably be more than 10 to 12 pages all by itself. So I know that you're writing a shorter paper than what a policy analysis in a professional setting would be. So I know that you're making some decisions on length, and so we don't really want a paper that the body of the paper is 15, 16, 18 pages long, because I know full well that there's that much information. I know there's hundreds of pages of information. In fact, many of the sources you're using will be longer than your actual policy analysis paper. So I know that you're cutting back. And in fact, capturing the most important elements is maybe one of the lessons that we're trying to inculcate here. Now, not included in the 10 to 12 pages is the cover page. And I would hope that your cover page doesn't say policy analysis paper. I hope your cover page says what the policy is and or what the problem is and how you plan to solve it. Give it a title. You know, when you look at, War and Peace by Tolstoy, he didn't call it book. So don't call this policy analysis paper. At the end, also not in the 10 to 12 pages, will be your reference section, sometimes called a bibliography or works cited. But since we're using APSA style, you'd say the reference page. This could include sources from the class, such as the Bardock book, any of the articles, even any of the videos that you used, if they provide insight that you're going to be able to use to help your paper. Now, if you have fewer than 14 sources, that's not to indicate that you're going to fail the course, especially this semester of all semesters, right? But a ideal paper, a very good or exceptional paper, is going to have more sources and not just a few. Right, so if you start with thinking about Bardock articles that we have, they're going to be more. But probably just as important as that, we want you to have some detail. We want you to have some actual numbers. And where do you find those numbers? Well, you certainly can't make those numbers up. So groups that advocate for one alternative or against an alternative or for a separate alternative, or government reports on the status quo, news reports about the problem, especially government reports about the problem, are all going to be things that you're going to cite. So if you say, 4 out of 5 dentists surveyed recommend sugarless gum, right? Don't don't just say that's something I remember from somewhere. Cite where you found that. Now, the directions actually spell out several of the sections that would ideally go into your paper. Now, not all of your papers are going to look exactly like this. I often talk about following the order that I've suggested as being a safe harbor, or at least a safer harbor. Now, you might have a policy that has a particularly complicated aspect that you might give its own section to. If you were doing a paper on, sending a astronaut to Mars, there's probably going to need to be a great deal more analysis of the technical limitations of being able to send an astronaut to Mars than if you're doing a paper on school lunches. School lunches are something that we probably, so long as we know how to afford it, we know how to provide it. So I could imagine if you're sending somebody to Mars, it's probably 2 or 3 pages on just why you think that's even possible. And certainly you're going to have to discount its advantages because it's not something that's going to happen next year. So in any case, we have said that you start with the problem. Now, you probably would really want to start with an introduction, right? Your introduction will probably spell out everything important to know. Tell me the problem, tell me what's being done, tell me what you would suggest to do instead. Say what some of the, what's wrong with the policy now, and how you plan to fix it, and have that be the introduction. This isn't a mystery novel. This isn't. I was watching a documentary on Alfred Hitchcock. This isn't. There's not a plot twist at the end that we're looking for. Instead, what we're looking for is for you to just give me your best insight into, what the rest of the paper is going to be. Then in your next section, you're going to begin to talk about the importance of how this policy is going to reach the public agenda. This is where you're going to talk a little bit about the political feasibility of the policy that you're interested in. You want to know, can it be done? Is there a political will to do it? What would have to happen? Which of the government agencies, is it the U.S. Department of Transportation? Is it the Georgia Department of Transportation? Is it the Park Service in Atlanta? Who exactly is going to try to accomplish this task? The next thing that you're going to want to do, though, is you're going to want to say, well, how are we going to bring it to their attention and get it adopted? The next section is going to talk about the criteria. Now, some people like to start with alternatives and go to criteria. I like to imagine, well, what does fixed look like before I start to try to figure out how to fix something? If you've ever watched, an action adventure movie, and there's always the scene, and I swear, in just about every scene, every time, right, where the hero has to do the thing that doesn't normally make sense. So perhaps you've watched a Bruce Willis movie, and the bad guy shoots and there shatters the windshield, and he can no longer see to drive out of it. So what does he do? He decides, well, I'm going to kick out the windshield. And he kicks out the windshield, and then he pulls off his bloody, sweaty shirt and he wipes all the shattered glass out of the way and then he drives off. And you're like, wow, he's a cool adventure hero. Now, that might be a really good alternative for when a bad guy shoots and shatters your windshield, but you can't see to drive, but you still have to get away. But it's not really a good recommendation for how to see better when, there's bird droppings on your windshield. So if there's bird droppings on your windshield, you have an entirely different alternative that's probably the strongest alternative. So if you can tell me what your criteria is first, it will help me. So your criteria should also make it clear between your alternatives which is better. Sometimes one alternative will give you a better outcome on one aspect, maybe it's less expensive, while a different alternative will give you a better score on a different outcome, perhaps that it works better. All too often, right, in a perfect world, the things that are inexpensive would work better. But all too often, that's not the case. So if we're going to balance between the alternatives, you're going to have to tell me, well, how much better does something have to be to justify it costing more? The entire principle behind cost-benefit analysis is that you can measure the value of 1 degree cooler Earth surface temperatures, right? You can put a value on just how important it is to balance the budget. Now, I guess a few of you have said it's so important that we should legalize drugs, right? Because then we'll raise money and that'll make everything perfect. Well, maybe it doesn't make everything perfect, but if you put enough value on balancing the budget, then maybe that is what we need to do. Well, so anyway, once you have spelled out the criteria, then you need to spell out the alternatives. Remember, you don't get to pick outcomes. You have to be able to justify that the alternative will lead to a particular outcome. But you don't get to choose the outcome. You just get to choose what policy is going to be adopted. Choose between those policies and then justify it. And then finally, you just need to write your conclusion, and you're pretty much going to be reiterating how choosing the alternative that you chose led to the outcome that you desire or you expect it to, and thereby solving the problem. So there's a lot of important concepts there, and it doesn't have to be perfect. A perfect paper would probably be 300 pages long. But I think that your solution, your outcome, should follow from each of those other steps that you consider. And kudos to the person who is willing to admit that they don't have a perfect solution, because there is no perfect solution. Bardock would tell us about the $20 bill. If something looks like a $20 bill on the ground, it probably isn't. Because if it was a $20 bill, somebody would have picked it up already. Look at the slides. I will often tell you where I found the information that I'm utilizing. It might be useful to cite the original information rather than saying Snook 2020. Make sure that you've read back through Bardock. Bardock is very, very useful and talks about ways to reconsider or reconceptualize problems in order to help to solve them. Now, I tell students quite often that a final paper, in some respects, is an essay exam. What I mean by that is that when you can show that you've learned important concepts from the course, then it makes your paper, it helps your instructor believe that your paper is good. When you're bringing in ideas from the outside that have nothing to do with anything that's been done in the class, the feeling, the deep in the core feeling of the grader is often that you don't really understand the concepts as they were addressed in the class. And it's great when you read and you see somebody bring something from outside and they say it's because I disagree, or what I learned in class helped me to also recognize the connection between this idea and this idea from outside of the class. That's strong. That's very good. But when you just cite somebody who says exactly what somebody in the course said, or something very similar that suggests that you're unaware that we covered it in class, that's less good. I'm not going to directly punish anybody for that, but just give you some insight into my state of mind as I'm grading. I intend to follow the rubric closely. I think that most of us have been doing really well in the course, at least those who've kept up and have been turning things in. I suspect we'll have a few people who aren't quite able to put it all together at the end, but I'm really hoping for all of you. And if you are unsure of any idea or any concept or any directions, please contact me. I will enjoy the time between now and the beginning of next month where you're going to be working on this assignment. If you need any extra time, well, even if I've said no, I still say don't fail the course for failing to ask. And we'll work together to make sure that we're as successful as possible. All right. Well, good luck. I might have a few final thoughts for you around the end of next week. However, if this is the last you hear from me, I wish you all well. I wish you all good luck. Make sure that you finish both the paper and the final exam. And if there's anything that I can do to help you either during this class or afterward this summer, feel free to be in touch.